again, everyone, and welcome to the Philly Factor. I'm your host, Paul Perrello. Philadelphia has the distinction of being a city of neighborhoods, no matter which way you go, whether it's from the Northeast to the Southwest, North to South, wherever you travel in the city of Philadelphia, we are pretty much known from the neighborhood that we grew up in or the neighborhood that we currently live in. With that being said, with all these neighborhoods that are out there, Philadelphia is also said to be one of the most walkable cities in America. And to that extent, I am glad that we have with us here on our program an author of a book called Historic Tours, let me make that Walking Tours of Historic Philadelphia. Ed Colimore is my guest on the program. And Ed, I want to thank you for your time and congratulate you on this great book.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for inviting me to the Philly Factor to talk about Philadelphia's unique history and my book, Philadelphia Inquirer's Walking Tours of Historic Philadelphia. This is especially timely right now because we are approaching the 250th birthday of the country on July 4, 2026. I had worked as a staff writer at a Baltimore newspaper for about 10 years, and I saw an opportunity to come to the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1982, and I jumped at it. The Inquirer was expanding its coverage and its footprint across the region. And when I got here, I covered everything: the courts, police, politics, and the military. I wrote stories out of Afghanistan, Qatar, Germany, Colombia, as well as military bases across the country. But my longtime interest was American history. It was something I had always been interested in. I had planned originally to become a history teacher until I was bitten by the newspaper bug. Over my 34 years at the Inquirer, I wrote literally hundreds of stories on the history of Philadelphia and South Jersey. My colleagues would see one of my stories, and I every time one would pop up, they'd roll their eyes and say, "If it's dead, it's Ed." If there was a rare item that was acquired by a museum, I'd often get a call from the institution to come over and do a story. If there was an archaeological dig in the area, I'd get a call. Sometimes I'd call them and I'd ask if I could go down into their, into the storage area or their basement where the items that were not publicly displayed were down there, and I'd write stories about those things. Eventually, in 2000, 2001, Inquirer's editors asked me to do a book that took people on walking tours of Philadelphia's history. And I ended up doing 4 editions, and I had to keep updating it. You would think history doesn't change, but the historic sites open and close, and there are significant changes over the years. And of course, you remember when COVID hit too, that affected things. And I also ended up writing another book called Eyewitness Reports, the Inquirer's live coverage of the American Civil War, about the newspapers reporting during the war. It was, of course, the Civil War was like the first instant news war because of telegraph, and because sometimes reporters could hop on a train and get back to their office because, for instance, Uriah Hunt Painter, one of the Inquirer's reporters, covered the Battle of Bull Run. He didn't want to go through the government censors in Washington, and he got a train to Philadelphia and turned his story in right there. But back to Philadelphia, the Walking Tours book takes you on 12 walks, building by building, house by house, more than 200 sites, giving a history of what happened at each location in some broader context. The book's index is very useful because it allows you to quickly find things. Today's tourist attractions were also drawing people back in 1876. They were like yesterday's tourist attractions too. And there was a souvenir book that was prepared for the Centennial Exposition, which was held in Philadelphia, as you know. And the author wrote, and I have to quote this here: Philadelphia possesses more relics of the past, more edifices around which hang a halo of history than any other city in the Union. I like that, the halo of history. Huh? So Philadelphia, to its credit, preserved rather than bulldozed much of its history. I think you were interested also in some of the changes that might be taking place among the historic sites as we get ready for the 250th.
I'd like to get into that a little bit because unlike 1976, which was the bicentennial, when the eyes and the ears of the world were on Philadelphia for perhaps not so great reasons, given the climate at that time in 1976, everybody thought that Philadelphia would become the epicenter for the bicentennial celebration, and perhaps to a certain degree it was. But there were a whole lot of other things that were in motion too that really distracted from the celebration that should have been primarily focused here. Because look, at the end of the day, I think Ed, you would agree. At the end of the day, it all began here. It all began in what was then the Pennsylvania State House when the founding fathers got together and they wrote up this Declaration of Independence. And there are other historic sites up and down the East Coast among the 13 colonies. But when all is said and done, it really all started here in Philadelphia. So there are numerous celebrations that will take place in 2026 to mark the 250th anniversary of the country. And to that extent, there will be a lot of people coming to Philadelphia, and maybe even people who live in Philadelphia and have lived here for a while and maybe have not taken a recent trip or tour to the historic sites. So a lot of attention then will be on Philadelphia for a number of reasons. With that being said, and given this post 9/11 era that we are living in, some of the sites that I remember as a kid that were very free and open, not free in terms of admission, but open that you could just walk in and tour at a leisurely pace. A lot of that has fallen by the wayside just because of the world that we live in today. So when you talk about these tours, what type of changes, like a person like myself, I grew up in the city, I went on the proverbial school trip, saw the Liberty Bell when the Liberty Bell was in the foyer of Independence Hall. But with these walking tours now, have they changed and morphed into something else?
Well, there are still a lot of places that you can just, walk in and enjoy. Others you might want to check with the Independence Visitor Center, and you're going to have to sometimes wait to get in some of the locations because there's going to be some crowds. I mean, we're going to have 500,000 more people coming in 2026. That's what they're expecting. We're also having an all-star game, the World Cup, and numerous conventions.
Right,
so
right.
Many visitors will be headed to the Independence National Historical Park, which is really the most historic square mile in the nation. 46 buildings of some historic note, 54 acres that tell the story of the country. More than 2.5 million people visit every year, but there's going to be more in 2026. The thing is, the park needs a lot of maintenance, so changes are on the way for the 250th. I'll mention a few if that's okay with you.
Sure, please.
Well, Welcome Park on 2nd Street. A lot of people don't even know about that park. It's between Walnut and Chestnut, and it's going to be getting a makeover. It's slate and marble surface of the plaza there has fallen into disrepair. It's cracked and needs some maintenance. The park was named after the ship that brought William Penn here. Of course, Penn, who founded Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. Penn once said of Philadelphia that he wanted to create a green country town that would not be burnt and would always be wholesome. And then later on, he wrote after founding Philadelphia, he said, I'll read this: what love, what care, what service, what travail has there been to bring thee forth and preserve thee from such as would abuse and defile thee. This park was the site of the slate roof house. This was Penn's home, the first house in the colonies to have a slate roof. And the house is gone, but there's a smaller replica of the statue that stands on top of City Hall of William Penn. And there was a proposal at one point to remove this statue. I think that got some blowback. And now they're going to keep the statue, but there are efforts to incorporate the stories of local Native Americans. Another site that's going to get a big makeover is the First Bank of the United States, which is on 3rd Street between Chestnut and Walnut. And it's a beautiful building. It's a Greek Revival building design. And it's getting $27 million, as I understand, of improvements, renovations. It is going to turn it into a museum that tells the story of the early economy of Philadelphia, the early days. It was the first building that was designed for the new federal government, which was based in Philadelphia. It was built between 1795 and 1797. It was to handle the nation's finances because there was no national currency then, and the banks were issuing their own notes, so that got a little confusing. Another site that's going to get a makeover is the Declaration House, or Graff House, and that's at 7th and Market Streets. And it's a reconstruction, really, of the house where Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. That original house was razed, but they kept some parts of it, and then they rebuilt it. But the house has been basically closed since 2018. And they are going to take the first floor and recreate the rooms that Thomas Jefferson, what it looked like when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration. Jefferson actually, I think, wrote the Declaration on rooms on the 2nd floor, but I guess it's easier for visitors to see, without having to get an elevator or climb some steps. So that's another, big change. There's another one. I just got a few here. Benjamin Rush Garden at 3rd and Walnut. Now that's an 18th century garden at the site of this notable physician and patriot, Dr. Rush. And he basically, they're going to revamp this garden, and they're going to put a 10-ton replica of the Liberty Bell there. This is the same one that was presented to the park in 1976 by Queen Elizabeth, the so-called bicentennial bell, and they're going to put it in that garden. So nobody has seen the bell, I guess, since 2013 when they put it in storage. So now it's going to be there in 2026. And then there's Carpenter's Hall at 320 Chestnut. It hosted the first Continental Congress in 1774. It had a fire there, and it's undergone some repairs, and it should be looking a little bit spiffier. It was a meeting place for all the great men of the time: George Washington, John Adams, Paul Revere, Patrick Henry, Ben Franklin. Patrick Henry said I am not a Virginian, but an American. A good quote. And then finally, the west wing of Independence Hall, 6th and Chestnut, that's going to get an interior renovation. improved exhibits, new carpeting, new AC and heat. The building houses original printed copies of the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, and U.S. Constitution. And there's an exhibit there that has the original silver inkstand that is believed to have been used by the 56 signers of the Declaration, who mutually pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. But those are some of the changes that are going to be getting prepared for the 250th.
It seems like a pretty aggressive agenda to get all these buildings ready in the next 2 years, but hopefully they will be done on time for the celebration. Might there be plans, Ed, for you to either revise the current book that is out there, or come out with a whole entirely different book to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country?
Yeah, I'll have to talk to the publisher of Camino Books about that. We just revised this one about, I guess it was 2 years ago, and a lot of changes happen, and so maybe we have to do another one. I keep myself busy with other book projects, and so we'll see. I'm currently looking at doing a book on the Holocaust survivor and the story there. I just finished editing a book about Du Bois, Pennsylvania, and it was done by a Philadelphia area cardiologist, Dr. William Beckwith. But I keep busy with my writing projects. I don't know if you wanted to talk about some favorite walking tours or favorite historic sites. We can do that if you like. As you said yourself, Philadelphia is a very walkable city.
Sure.
And the people who come here sometimes they have different goals in mind. Some want to just they revel in the history and they dive in. Others come here, they'll take in they'll take a little history, but they don't want to go too deep. And then there's others who just want to admire the architecture, take a leisurely stroll, through the past. So, I mean, as far as recommending possible walks, I would say someone who comes here with a rudimentary grasp of American history may want to start their day at the Museum of the American Revolution at 3rd and Chestnut, or the Independence Visitor Center at 6th and Market. You do that, and you become more oriented, and you can immerse yourself in the history that happened around the buildings and the houses that you're going to visit and see. That would be one recommendation. If I was to start at the Museum of the American Revolution, that's a good place. Of course, you got to pay there. The visitor center, there are things there that you can do that are not going to cost you. But if I did start at the Museum of the American Revolution, there are wonderful exhibits there and paintings and that tell the history. There was a painting there that had an interesting story. It was involved a patriot warrior who was he's in the uniform of a colonel in the Continental Army. He stands near a walled powder magazine in Franklin Square. On his left is like a large mortar. Behind him, there are cannon barrels, and to the right of him, there's ammunition. But this was a painting that was done, and I tell you the story because there's a story behind the painting that's interesting. The portrait was done by artists Charles Wilson and James Peale, and sort of similar to other things that they've done before. But this one's different because the painting tells a story if you know how to interpret. The officer's name was Benjamin Flower, and he's extending his right hand and points his index finger to the distant cupola of Independence Hall. You can see the Independence Hall in the background, and you might ask yourself, what is he trying to signal? And Flower was he was unknown compared with other Peel subjects such as George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, but he wanted to be remembered for saving what later became known as the Liberty Bell, just ahead of the British occupation in 1777. He oversaw the removal of 11 bronze bells in the city to prevent them from falling into the hands of the British and being melted down into cannon barrels.
Wow.
And so that's why he's pointing at that cupola. So there's like little stories, things like that make things come alive. But if I start at the museum, I would probably walk across the street, across 3rd Street, to visit the First Bank of the United States. If you're there, especially in 2026, you'd be able to go inside, and it's going to be beautiful. It's got to be after $26 million, right?
Exactly.
Then I'd head to nearby Carpenter's Hall at 320 Chestnut. And I mentioned that earlier. And then to the Second Bank of the United States at 420 Chestnut. That's another Greek Revival building, which now has a wonderful portrait gallery with the paintings of colonial and federal leaders. And after that, I'd probably visit Independence Hall, 6th and Chestnut, and the Liberty Bell Center right across the street there. There's a lot to do in one day. You might need to have a couple days, especially if you spend extra time at the museum. You might want to pick and choose a collection of sites that suit you. I have a British friend who has visited me several times over the years, and my wife and I have taken her to other favorite sites. One being City Hall at Broad and Market, largest city hall in the nation. The cornerstone was laid in 1874, and the statue was put on top of William Penn. The statue by Alexander Calder, placed on top in 1894. And with all the statues and decorative work, it's been described as a Victorian wedding cake. And some think it's beautiful. Some think it's grotesque. But you can take tours of City Hall, and you can go up into the tower for a panoramic view of the city. I also took my friend across the street to the Masonic Temple, another ornate and striking building where you can see a museum with George Washington's Masonic apron. You can visit these wonderful lodge halls, richly adorned, representing Egyptian, iconic, Corinthian, Oriental, Italian Renaissance, Gothic, and Norman styles. The Egyptian one, the hieroglyphics that are in that lodge hall are so accurate that some scholars will come and just study them. Other places I have taken visitors is to, well, of course, you can't miss the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which speaks for itself. And adjacent to that, the Fairmount Waterworks, which is a grouping of Greek Revival buildings that has been part of a water pumping station, but they have events there now, and it's just a beautiful place, and overlooking the Schuylkill. That's a great location. And of course, the Boathouse Row, home to the rowing clubs. And just a couple other favorite sites. I'll mention that Laurel Hill Cemetery, a little off the beaten path, some things. You have to get in your car to get there. But it's a beautiful Victorian necropolis at 3822 Ridge Avenue. dozens of military commanders there, including Union General George Gordon Meade, who was the victorious commander at the Battle of Gettysburg, and also a Confederate General John Pemberton, who surrendered Vicksburg to Union General Ulysses S. Grant in 1863. Just what was that, like about a day after? Yeah, it was July 4, 1863, the day after Pickett's charge and the victory there at Gettysburg.
You're just a fountain of information, and we're short on time here. But we're going to have to come back and continue this discussion because, needless to say, not only your book but the city in general is such a great place to explore. And I want to thank you for your time, Ed.
Oh, yeah.
The book is great, and back in the we'll have to have you come back on and continue to discuss, especially as we lead up to 2026.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Ed Colimore. He is the author of Walking Towards Historic Philadelphia. So much information. You can check out the book online. It's available on Amazon, available in bookstores. And again, my thanks to Ed for being with us. Until the next time, my name is Paul Perrello. Thanks so much for being with us here on the Philly Factor.